Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and today we have a special collaborative crossover episode with my new friend, Matt Walker, the host of the Choir Conductor Corner podcast. He's awesome, y'all. You've got to jump over to his website. So many resources. He flipped the camera on me and asked tons of questions so that I could get to know, or his audience could get to know me. And it was just so fun to talk to another podcast host. We talk about resources and rehearsal techniques. He asked me a ton of questions about the things that I do as a choral entrepreneur and music educator. He shares his story into education and music, and it's a lot of fun. It's one of those conversations that I hope as you listen, you find something that reminds you and inspires you why we do this. Because y'all, it is a tough job, but it is so much fun. And I hope that you are feeling invigorated and inspired. And if not, there's a Choir Director Corner podcast that you can go check out for more resources. There's all the resources you have on the Music Ed Matters podcast, and we're here for you. I know both Matt and I are so appreciative of our audiences. So, this episode is brought to you by our friends at the Kinnison Choral Company. If you're looking for those awesome rehearsal tracks, you know where to go. KC is the bomb. And our friends over at Kaleidoscope Adventures. I've been talking about it a lot, but I'm just getting so excited about it. Alex Gardner and I are doing a festival with professional development aspects added onto it. So if you just want to come as a teacher, that's an option too, in Myrtle Beach, first weekend in June 2023. So we are so thankful for Kaleidoscope Adventures for sponsoring the podcast, but then for also making that festival possible. Anyway, without further ado, I can't wait for you to meet Matt Walker of the Choir Director Corner podcast as he asks me a ton of questions and we talk about all sorts of fun things that make our lives as music educators awesome. I hope you enjoy.
Well, I am very excited to have Dr. Emily Williams Birch here to the podcast. Emily, thank you so much for joining me and hanging out with me today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Matt. I'm very excited to have this episode go out for the Choir Director Corner podcast, but I'm also excited to introduce you and your resources and your podcast to my listeners over on the Music Ed Matters podcast.
Wonderful. And, I ran into you on Facebook, I think it was, and then the podcast, of course, your amazing podcast, which, how many episodes are you deep into that now? It's over 100, right?
117 went out just a couple days ago, and I believe with all the bonus episodes, it puts me over 130, but it's been a really fun project. I started it right after the pandemic. Funny story, I really wanted to start a podcast in the middle of my doctorate, and I vividly remember calling my husband and being like, I have the best idea. I want to start a podcast. And he was stone silence. And I'm like, isn't it a great idea? I'd have so much fun. And he goes, finish school, move home, we'll discuss it. So when the pandemic hit, I was like, I have a great idea. And he's like, great, what? I'm like, I can start a podcast now.
That's usually the response from my wife when I come up with these crazy ideas. Like, she just kind of gives me that look like, you're insane. Like, finish something else before you start something else.
But isn't that so true? Like, I think that's why I love podcasting world, because you can have a little glimpse into all these different concepts and ideas and peoples that are almost like feeding my need to do everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. People that are, they say multi-passionate, if you're super passionate about things in lots of different areas, it's great because you can talk about all these people in these different fields of expertise. And, I don't know about you, but for me, it's sort of a bit of a selfish thing too, because I get to learn right along with all the people that are in my audience too. Mm-hmm. So it's great for me too.
That was one of my selling points to my husband. I was like, I'm done with school. I have a doctorate, but there's still so much to learn. So this will feed my need to continue learning.
That's right. Growth mindset is alive.
Yes. That is so awesome. So when and why did you start your podcast?
Well, mine was, I think, similar to yours, where, during the pandemic and teaching online. And so, I would have 45-minute Zoom class, and then I would just kind of sit there like, okay, now what? And then, kind of becoming fluent in everything Zoom almost out of necessity. It's just like, well, I could use Zoom as a podcast. And for me, it started off as a way of just kind of connecting with people that were familiar with me through my website or my Facebook group, just to have another path to share things with them. And then as I got into it, got more comfortable with it, then it's just like, okay, I need to start branching out, and there's so many people, like you said, so many people that I could talk to, and that my audience could learn from, and that I could learn from. And so going in that direction now, and then it's been great, which is what led me to you. So
That's
here
so
we
cool.
are.
Because it's so opposite. Every once in a while I'll do a solo episode. We call them the doctors, and they are, for me, exceptionally stressful. I don't know why. I love talking to people, and I think just talking to myself is not my favorite thing on the planet. I would much rather be with another human. So mine have always been interviewing guests for the main reason, not just for me to learn, but the students that I teach are in a small town in South Carolina. And I had just come back after the pandemic from our Southern Region American Choral Directors Association conference in Mobile. And I was thinking, how do I get my students to meet all of these wonderful people that I call friends and colleagues? And that was the tipping point.
That's great. Yeah. And I agree too. Like the conversations I have with guests, it just flows so much more naturally than me myself sitting in
But
front
you
of a
do great
microphone by
episodes.
myself.
I want to make sure the listeners know, go check out Matt's website, thechoirdirectorcorner.com. He has so many episodes that are within that 15 to 20 minute range that are like quick fire, tips to do this, warm-up ideas, rehearsal techniques, things you can listen on the way to school and immediately implement. And Matt, that's such a great resource that you have created.
Well, I appreciate that. And that was kind of my thinking when I started off, because when I started, I currently had about a 15 to 20 minute drive to my school. And I love to listen to podcast episodes where one episode would take me all the way up to, parking in my spot. And anything longer than that, I still enjoyed it, but it was kind of harder for me to sort of jump back in, having to stop for whatever. And so that was initially, where I started. It's like, it's hard, some of these podcast episodes where, it's an hour or more. But, when you have great people to talk to.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to cut them short, and it's just, you don't want to. And I know you can look at all the algorithms and the stats of how far people listen into a podcast. So we know that the majority of people don't listen all the way to the end, which is fine. But I just recorded an episode right before talking to you, and it's a long one. But it is so engaging throughout. And it's that kind of balance of, okay, here's a long one. You might have to listen to it in a few clips. Here's a shorter one, quick tips. But I love that yours also started for, I want to be entertained during my commute and feel like I'm talking to a friend.
That's right. That's right. And speaking of trying to keep it to an hour, I looked at all of the irons that you have in the fire. I'm like, how am I going to keep this to an hour with Emily? Like, we might have to circle back and talk about all the other stuff that you do too. So, but hey, let's dive right in and just tell my audience, for those that are unfamiliar with your work, tell a little bit about you and some of the things that you do.
You are so kind. Well, my accountant calls me a serial entrepreneur. I like to kind of clean that up and call myself a choral entrepreneur. I'm just kind of reimagining what we can do in our field, because I started teaching and I taught at a middle school, and I was the choir teacher there. And then I moved to a K-8 school where I became department chair, and I thought, this is it. This is my 35-year career right here. And then I got offered a job in corporate America working for a music curriculum, traveling across the whole country, doing teacher trainings. Hello, that's my career. This is what I'm going to do for 30 years. So I go and I do that. And then my husband, my boyfriend at the time, proposes and is like, hey, I love you. Let's get married. Can you find a job where you're actually kind of living here occasionally? Because I was not really ever home. And so then I became full-time director of music and education of a community choir. And I'm like, this is it. This is my 30-year goal right here. This is going to be the dream. And then there was kind of a shift in the mission and the board of that organization. And they went from being super education focused to being super performance focused. And that is awesome. I support that. But I was the wrong person for their position if that was the direction they wanted to go. So then I went and took some business classes and was like, I'm starting my own choir. And I did that 8 years ago. I'm like, this is it. But then I got offered an adjunct role at a college here in town, and I taught some classes at a college. I'm like, oh, I really love teaching college. Who'd have known? So then I applied and I got my doctorate, and I'm like, this is it. But then I'm like, but I don't do so well at this point now being in one building, doing one thing. So let me find a job that's flexible. So I have found just I've choral entrepreneured my life together. I work as a visiting faculty. I'm the coordinator of music ed, visiting music professor at a regional campus of University of South Carolina in Aiken, which is beautiful. It's right outside Augusta. It's just a picture-perfect southern town, and it's about 2.5 hours from Savannah, Georgia. My husband has a fabulous job in an aeronautics company. He's an engineer here in Savannah, and we are here for his amazing job, and I'm just putting together a career. So I have my college job, and then I have my community choir, and then I wrote a book because that's fun, and it talks about all of this business stuff. And then I have the podcast, and on the side I run because everybody needs a hobby. And it's a choral entrepreneur. It all ties together. If you listen to episode 117, most recently on my podcast, it talks about transfers. Transfers is the connective tissue of making things relate. I'm really just, an educator doing a lot of different fun things that all ties together and makes me a better musician.
You're just connecting it all together, right?
Yeah. I'm a connector.
I love it. I love it.
And it's different.
Let's talk about the running part here.
Yeah, you said you just started running.
Yeah, and so I had a foot injury a couple of years back, and so that kind of derailed me a little bit. And so I'm slowly working my mileage up. But then I see a picture of you on social media where you completed a marathon, and I'm like, first of all, when does she have time to train for a marathon?
Let me just start with the fact that this is genetic. So if you meet my dad or my papaw, they are just as much energy as me, if not more. The genetic bouncy ball thing, I can take no credit. It is genetic. I just have a lot of energy, and I force myself to get a full night's sleep because it's good for your brain. But that's about it. So yeah, I do love running, but I found running because in my master's degree, you've heard of Judy Bowers before at Florida State. It was the second or third week of school, and she's like, Emmy, I need you to come see me in my office. So I pop in there and, literally popped in there like a bouncy ball. And she just looks at me and she's like, we're going to need to find a way to get these bubbles under control. I'm like, oh, okay. What do you recommend? She's like, do you run or anything? I'm like, no, but if you tell me to run, I'm going to try it. So the next day I put on a pair of running shoes and I ran like 5 miles. I was like, that wasn't terrible.
Oh my gosh.
I think I like it. And so the rest is kind of in history. I never did a 5K. I just skipped right to a 10K. So I did a 10K and I was slow. Like I was real slow. And I have a couple of family members who are super athletic and they've done Ironmans and stuff. And so I call my cousin. I'm like, I did a 10K and I did it in this time. He's like, okay, you're going to do another one and you're going to aim for this time. So I did the next one. I'm like, I hit the time. Now what? Like it's just fun to have. It's not necessarily goals. It's more like habits that I can measure that I'm improving. And I love that. So I do have another little business on the side with my best running buddy, my best girlfriend. Kimmy and I own a running and pacing company. And it's called Elevated Running and Pacing. You're running elevated. So if you want, Matt, we have some great training programs and we can help you get from whatever mileage to whatever mileage, whether you're working on distance or speed or endurance or overall fitness. But our company does athlete training and then we serve as pacers. So I just recently was selected to be on the Chicago Marathon pace team, which is just, it's a fun thing to life is like a marathon. Teaching is like a marathon. You have to have a plan and a process, and there's a whole chapter on that in my book.
Yeah. And I would say training for running, it is. You have to have a plan, just like going into teaching and rehearsals and performances. Like you have to have a plan. At least if you have a plan, that's going to give you the best opportunity to be successful.
Oh, I think so too. And you had asked, you sent some really great questions before we got started, and you had asked about like my background and musical experiences. And my family's super musical. We've always done musical things, but I didn't actually get into any of the audition choirs in my undergrad. I never even made all-state choir. Now, I made all-state band. I played oboe, but I never did any of those things singing-wise. And I think the same can be related to running. I didn't run growing up. I just realized it was something that worked well with my brain and my body type as an adult. And I think because of that, I'm able to coach some of my athletes differently because it isn't something I just was automatically good at. And so because I didn't get into those audition choirs right off the bat and I had to work so hard, that's one of the reasons that a lot of my students are able to connect and learn how to read music, because the process in which I went through helped me become a better teacher. I think that's just it's a great way to look at things. You don't have to know how to do everything. You can teach the talent in a lot of cases.
Well, and if you're a student of someone who has gone through all of those challenges and, been able to work through that and problem solve, and here's how you do this and here's how you do that. Like, it's sort of like working with a voice teacher. Like,
yes.
You might have a voice teacher who just has a voice blessed from the heavens, but they might not be able to teach you all that much. Whereas if you've got someone who's really had some challenges that they had to work through with their voice, and they had to really sort of brainstorm and problem solve and work through it and practice it, they're going to be able to teach you a lot more of those strategies and techniques. So,
or teaching the students that come in with so much talent how to break it down. So often we get one or two of those students in my music ed classes that are just super talented, and teaching them, okay, well, it comes naturally for you. What are you doing? And looking down at those mechanics. So anyway, all that to say, running and music have a lot of things in common. You don't have to love running. It's just what works for me.
It's a great workout for lungs too, right?
It is. It is good for lung capacity. Yes.
I love it. Love it. So you have this instrumental background. You played the oboe. So talk a little bit. How did you get into this world of directing choirs then? How did that come about?
Oh, you're sweet to ask. Like I said, my family's super musical. My dad is not classically trained at all, and he can pick up any instrument and just play. It's incredible. And by ear. You're like, hey, Dad, I want to do this tune. And he'll just sit down at the piano and find it. I don't have that skill set. Just FYI. But because of that, he grew up doing the marching band at his really big school in high school, and I never did marching band, but I did play oboe. I liked it for the ear training. I liked it because I was the only one. It was hard. It was challenging. But I didn't want to play oboe in college. I really wanted to do piano because I've been playing piano forever. But then I found out that you're by yourself in a practice room with both of those instruments. And that did not work for Miss Extroverted over here. So I switched to voice because that involves more people, more talking. And that worked really well for me. And I thought really I was just going to get a degree in music, not anything specific. And I was going to go be a real estate agent. Like that's what I just thought, I can sell anything. I can sell a house. I love houses. My dad's always built them. I love going to open houses. I'll be a great real estate agent. But then junior year, I finally got, I took Introduction to Music Education sophomore year and was like, yeah, this is great. It'll be fun. This is just a fun class with my friends. But junior year, I took Elementary Music Methods. And it was like a switch clicked and everything changed. I ended up auditing that class multiple times and teaching as many classes as possible. I got a job right after that class at a Montessori school that had just opened. It was just all the pieces fell into play. I just didn't know that's what I wanted to do until it just happened to me. And I mean, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I wasn't sure. Everybody else wanted to teach high school, and I had kind of had a meh high school choir experience. I did choir because I would love to have 2 music classes in a day versus having, I don't know, a math class with that. So anyway, there's the story. That's how I found it. So it was kind of, I found that the children's choir thing happened. Did you happen to go to the National ACDA conference in Miami in like 06 or 07? I think 07.
I didn't make it to that one, I don't think.
It was our first one there. I think there were 12 or 15 of us undergrads from LSU that went. And it was my Christmas present. It was the best Christmas present. I tell my parents. It was the gift that changed my life. So I went there and I saw Henry Lett conduct the Indianapolis Children's Choir. And I saw Mariana conduct the Houston Elementary Choir, the honor choir that she has there. And I walked out and I looked right at Ken Fulton, my professor at the time, and I said, I want to do that. And the next day I went to the Children's and Youth Forum that they had, and at the end of the conversation, they were asking open table, anyone need anything? And a couple people popped up in the front row and said, we just started a children's choir in Savannah, Georgia. We're looking for summer interns. And I bebopped my way over there. I was like, I could do that.
Bing!
Yes. And so that became a relationship that I came just as a summer intern teaching a class on musicality and basically elementary general music at summer camp for fourth graders, second graders through sixth graders, seventh graders. It was a blast. But when I came back the next year, they had a new choir director, and he's like, I need you as my assistant. And I learned a ton. And then the next summer I came back, I had started my master's degree. I came back the next summer, and that guy had retired. And so I show up the day before camp starts, and the people in charge of camp are like, by the way, here's all the music. You're going to be the choir director. And so it was just those serendipitous moments. And I'm like, okay, this is what I'm doing. I love children's choir. Look at me do it. I mean, there's been a lot of bumps along the way, but it's a lot of fun. Our career choice is just pure fun.
It was just meant to be. Yeah. Love it. Well, and I am married to an elementary music educator and a children's chorus director. And so I can understand and relate to a lot of that just in her path, too. And that was always something that she knew from very early on that she wanted to do, and had some of the similar experiences, I think, that you're talking about, and seeing different children's choir. And that just affirmed for her that, yep, that is what I want to do. And she has been doing it for over 20 years and
That's
has
awesome.
Used to be fourth and fifth grade choir, but now it's third and fourth grade. Her school switched to K4. And it's just children's choirs is just a wonderful thing. It's just there's just something special about seeing young singers and just their love of singing. It's just a wonderful thing.
It's so invigorating. And I know there's also so much work and outside things that come with it, and we talk about that in the book we just wrote. And Barbara Tagg does a great job of talking about all of it in her book, Before the Singing. That is such a great book. And Barbara Tagg's generation is the generation that came and had to define what children's choir means. There's that generation that came, and we're so lucky that children's choirs just exist. People know what that means when you say it. And there's that generation before that had to lay the groundwork of, well, this is what a children's choir can sound like. This is what it can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's shift gears into another one of your interests, and that is traveling. And I saw on your website that you actually had the opportunity to travel to Sweden as part of the International Conductors Exchange Program. So talk a little bit about that. Like, first of all, talk about the travel. Like, that just sounds amazing. But talk a little bit also about the music part of that experience and how that kind of influenced you on your path as a music educator.
Well, thank you for doing such amazing research. That's the first thing. Travel, I think travel is just important in general. Just getting singers to see other lived experiences. And that is something that I was actually blessed to be just brought up in when I started with the choir that I started with, that I met in Miami and started working with their summer camp programs. When I moved to Savannah full-time, thanks to their help getting a full-time job here, they had just done their first tour. They had gone to England. And prior to that, they had gone to Chicago. So they started with a national tour in Chicago, and they had a great experience at a festival there. And then they did an international tour to England. So when I got here, they were planning out their next national tour, and they were doing like an every other year model. So I kind of came into this organization with it already, the one that I used to work for, with it already in place. And so I was lucky enough to come along, since I was not the executive director. I was only in charge of leading rehearsals, picking music, and directing concerts. I kind of was the assistant level when we went on our first trip. So we took something like 40 middle schoolers to Vienna and Prague. And that was fascinating. We competed in a competition there. And again, it was great because I wasn't in charge of the children. I was there to direct at the festival. I was there to lead any rehearsals, but someone else was in charge of getting the kids with who they needed to be with. And the year before, I had done a national tour with them to Nashville, Tennessee. So I had seen how they traveled. And there's just so much that you get to learn when traveling as a choir. You come together. And in fact, I just read an article about this in the most recent Choral Journal. It's a film review of a film about the LA Children's Chorus and their prior director, Ann Tomlinson. And they actually had a Grammy Award-winning documentary artist create a movie on her final tour and her final season. And it's a perfect piece for advocating for the power of travel, because travel brings your choir closer together, but it also changes each individual life. And I think seeing that firsthand without any type of stress, like those two trips, the Nashville trip, the Vienna Prague trip, those trips happened and I was more of an observer, just there to make the music part happen and to see the transition in these kids' lives. And I was immediately bit by the bug that travel and tour is so important. And so my community choirs today travel every single year. Mostly regional, as we're growing, because we're only 8 years old, mostly regional, but just that travel brings them together. So that's how I feel about travel and organizations. And that can be small. Like if you're a school, that could just be traveling all together in the bus to your feeder program, or traveling all the way in the bus to the high school you're all going to go to together. There's something about packing up your stuff, packing your lunch, and going and getting out of the building to come together. And I think there's a lot of really good stuff. But because of my love for travel, I got connected with a specific company. And so for a few years there, I was traveling as the artistic advisor, helping community ensembles and colleges put together their travel experiences abroad specifically. And then I would go and be there to bring them flowers or take them to dinner or help with rehearsals in any way, just making it seamless abroad. So that was really fun to kind of itch my travel love, my love of travel personally. But okay, the International Conductors Exchange Program is a really cool program that ACDA has. You need to have been with your current choir or organization for, I believe, 3 to 5 years before you're eligible. So I applied at the 5-year mark. I'd been with the organization for 5 years. 3 of those had been on a full-time basis. And you submit an application. I was super lucky to get selected. It worked out to where a Swedish conductor came here during the National ACDA conference to Utah when we were in Utah for that 1 year, 2015, I believe. And then that fall, I went to Sweden and they hosted me. And so it was a beautiful experience. We were in rehearsals. I got to be in schools and work with all of these amazing Swedish students. I got to sit in on church rehearsals and community choir rehearsals, and it was amazing to see how music is embedded and how choral singing is embedded in their culture. Everybody in Sweden sings in a choir. Mm-hmm. And I brought back folk tunes and warm-ups and engager activities that I still use to this day.
Yeah.
So that's it's amazing. Awesome. But yes, my big lesson from that, by the way, since I want this to be meaningful to your listeners, apply for the stuff. Apply for the stuff. Just apply. If you see something, just apply. No one else cares if you don't get selected. You shouldn't even care if you don't get selected. But if you don't apply, the answer is always no. So apply. Yes. I apply for everything.
I love that. Yep, that's the worst thing they could say is no, and like you said, no one is even going to know. There's no reason to be self-conscious or anxious
No.
about it. Just
And the people who are grading
apply
or
for different
judging or
things.
evaluating the application aren't even going to remember who all applied in 24 hours. Like it's not a big deal.
Yep.
Just apply for the stuff.
Yep, absolutely. I had sort of the same perspective when I was singing after my master's degree and doing all sorts of auditions, and I didn't care like what the audition was. Like, I just wanted to get better at auditioning, and it's like, okay,
Yes.
they may hate me, but they're going to forget me in like 5 minutes because they're listening to 100 other singers. And so just going and, yeah, putting yourself out there, and you never know what's going to fall into your lap, right?
Right. Thank you for asking. I love talking about travel. I just think it is such a big way to change how you hear it in that film, the choir and conductor, the one that was just released. You can hear the change in the ensemble pre-tour and post-tour. And that's dynamite.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's nothing like going and doing things in person. Like, I hear educators and in other subject areas like, oh, the world is so small now because you can get on Google and Zoom and you can do all of these things. But there's just nothing like traveling in person and making those connections in that way. There's just nothing like it.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So along with teaching, so you taught elementary, you've taught lots of different age groups, and you talked a little bit about now teaching college. So tell us, what is your favorite part of teaching at the collegiate level and working with that age group of musicians?
What a great question. That's a good question. I love seeing the transition that happens from what I call musician to musical educator. Not every student comes in understanding the entire sphere of what it means to be an educator. And I had one of my professors tell me this, that you come into your education classes and you kind of live in this bubble. And by the end, you're no longer seeing inside your bubble, but you've flipped your sphere inside out. And you're now seeing everyone else and how they are taking in or interpreting. And I just love that transition, the switch of the sphere per se, and hearing them grow as musicians because they're growing as educators. So I love and it happens all in 2 to 3 semesters, by the way, very, very quickly. Because you see that change like in your middle and high school students, and you see it in your little kindergartners. Every student has that light bulb moment. But I think with the collegiate level, it's that you watch them flipping their sphere inside out and becoming a different type of human as they change from almost a selfish musician in a way. I'm just trying to become first chair, whatever. Going to get into the music program, get into it. They switch from that competitive mindset to I'm here to educate. But I still have a little bit competitive in me.
Well, a little bit of that is okay, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Helps you work hard.
I saw that too with voice students, and having freshmen in college, and just kind of thinking to myself, okay, you still kind of have that high school mentality, and then somewhere at that end of that freshman year, beginning of sophomore year, just like you said, it was almost like a switch had been flipped, and they found this this way of sort of blocking out maybe some of those distractions that high school students often, there's all sorts of things that can attract their attention, and by that point, when they get into college, they decide, okay, I'm going to really, I don't know if narrow my focus is the right phrase, but they decide to finally make that investment in themselves and in learning whatever subject area they're trying to learn more about. And it's almost like they don't really understand in high school the level of investment that it really requires. They think they know, but they don't really know in order to really have exponential growth as musicians, and like you said, as music educators.
It's interesting, though. Like, I think this question, Matt, is a great question for all of us to kind of keep in the back of our mind as we go through the semester, as we go through the year. Because there's those points, like right now we're at the beginning of the school year for us down here in the South. So it's easy to get excited. It's fresh start, new syllabi. I call this my January 1st every year because I think it's the best time to set new habits and new goals. But I think it's so important when you hit those points of exhaustion or burnout or frustration, remembering what your favorite part is, writing down those light bulb moments, even when it's hard to find them. And I know a lot of people are struggling with what we have in front of us right now, and there's still positivity to be found. It's that frame of mind, and just taking a moment to reflect and ask yourself, what is it that I love about this? And reimagining it or rekindling it.
Yeah. I had a previous mentor and administrator that always said at the beginning of the year, he always said, they're not going to start where they ended. And I think for choir directors especially, because you might have someone that's in 10th grade in choir, and then they come back as an 11th grader, whereas a lot of other subject areas, they have just 9th grade or just 10th grade. And we kind of forget, and we think, okay, they're going to pick right up where they left off. And and we get frustrated when they don't. And he that's one of the things that he always said. He had a number of sayings, and that was one where it was so true. It's just like, it's going to be a whole new group, and they're not going to start where they ended, and that's okay. Totally, it's just okay. restarting that journey in a way from a different place.
It's so true too with like the college kids especially. They'll kind of go through those waves as other classes are stressful, and remembering that you might be like, I am their major subject area. I'm what they're going to be doing for a living, but they have so much other stuff they're balancing, and life and other stressors. And they call my class drinking from the fire hose, and I just hope they get a little bit of water and they have enough to survive, and they know how to go back and turn the hose on.
Yep. I love that. That's awesome. Well, and of course, then, everything that they forget over the 3 months that you don't see them, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's why we have podcasts and stuff to help rekindle the things that you missed or the things you've forgotten. It's nothing that you and I are doing on these podcasts is rocket scientist, or it's not necessarily a new concept. It's just reframing something or reminding us about something that we already know as musical educators.
Yeah. Yep. And we all know, being students and teachers, that students live, they learn in different ways. And so, sometimes it's just a matter of like you said, reframing something and sharing something from a little bit different perspective, and suddenly it clicks.
Can I flip that question back at you real quick?
Absolutely.
I want to know about your teaching position and why you choose to teach.
Oh boy, I'm not sure we have enough time for that one.
The Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, the Reader's Digest version. So my mother was a music teacher. She taught for almost 40 years, all different levels, vocal, instrumental, general music. And I grew up in a very small town in southeast Iowa, and there were about 4 or 5 years where the band teacher had quit, and they couldn't find anyone to fill that position. So in this very small school, my grade, I think, had 30 kids in that grade. That was as large as it was. But she was teaching K through 12, general music, choir, and band. Like, she was teaching all the things. And I just saw her, like, right in front of me, like the definition of burnout.
Oh, man.
And I said to myself very, very early on, there's no way I'm doing that. I am never going to do that to myself.
Never say never.
Yeah, right. Yeah, somebody else always has a plan for you. And it's, why would anyone do that to themselves? And so then got into high school, and my mom, she made me continue in choir and in band, even though I wanted to quit because I was like the smallest kid in my class and always got made fun of because I was, in music and whatever. She's like, nope, you're doing it. And had a terrific high school choir director who just really went out of her way to find different opportunities for me in my area for auditioning and performing and things like that. And got hooked up with this summer program that was sponsored by Luther College, which is a small liberal arts college in Northeast Iowa. And decided, well, maybe I want to do music performance. And so I did my music education classes at the prodding of my mom. She's like, no, you really need to get that education degree. And did that all the way up until my senior year. But then, kind of dropped that ed major and decided, no, I'm going to go do music performance. And did a master's in vocal performance. And then a few years after that, just wasn't, it's just like, this isn't quite right. This isn't quite my place. And I had the wonderful privilege of, in college, singing for Weston Noble, one-time director at Luther College, and learned so much from him, not just as a musician, but just as a human being. And just really cemented my love of singing and of choral singing at that time, and decided, okay, this is going to sound crazy. And again, similar to the face that your husband gave you when you said you wanted to start a podcast, it's like, I really want to go back and finish this and teach high school. And yep, my wife looked at me like I was crazy, but being a teacher herself, she supported me. Right. Went back and finished it and did my student teaching. And here I am years later. I started off with a small 6 through 12 program, and then ended up one high school program, leading that for 10 years, and then switched a couple of years ago to a larger program where now I have amazing colleagues and just a program with a great tradition. And, long answer short here, it's really, that love of music and that sense of community that I found with Mr. Noble at Luther College. I think that was something that had always stuck with me. And now that's, so philosophically, that's something that I, in some small way, want to give that experience to my own students. And so that's kind of how I ended up where I did, even though if you would have asked me, 14-year-old Matt Walker, like,
never going to be
no
a music
way.
teacher. I know.
Heck no, anything but that. And yep. And
it's that power of community that keeps bringing it together. And again, such a great memory as we're diving into the first of the school year coming up right now. That's such a great thing to remember, that we as educators have the opportunity to impact our communities through the power of music education, through the power of providing a place where individuals can come together and make something bigger than themselves. And that's philosophically huge. You saw it with Weston Noble. It's philosophically huge, but it step by step, day by day, can be hard, but that's the end goal. Yeah.
And it's, I think, never been more important than now, having gone through past couple years with COVID and the focus on SEL and, and mental health. There's no more important time than now to really focus on, yes, the notes and rhythms are important, but there's so much more that we can bring to our students that's gonna, stay with them and affect them positively, years down the road.
Definitely.
So,
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for sharing your story too, Matt. That's awesome to hear.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, talking about affecting lives of young singers, you did another thing You founded and you are the artistic director of a community choir. It's called the Rise Young Women's Chorale.
Yeah, what started
there
as
in
just
Savannah.
women. Like we just had treble voices back in 2016 because that was, I had
Okay.
left an organization. They were going in the performance direction. So I started something for just women. Singing brought us together, but we also learned how to socialize and do service projects for our communities. It was very much singing brought us together, but I wanted these young women to learn. I didn't know how to have lunch meetings when I first left the school system and went into corporate America. I'll never forget that first lunch meeting. I was sitting across from a fine arts coordinator, and we had finished the lunch pitch, and she was on board. She was ready to sign the paper, and I had eaten 0 bites of my lunch.
Oh.
Like, okay, how do we learn how to do this? And so we learned those things. That was kind of like the pinnacle point. Well, since then, if we just call it RISE for short, RISE is an acronym. It stands for Revolutionizing and Inspiring Singing Excellence, because I believe you can learn the discipline needed to be an excellent singer, whatever that means for you individually. That will empower you to do excellent and amazing things that require discipline for life, whether that's related to music or not. It doesn't matter. Singing's what brings you together, but learning the power of the soft skills was really important. So we started as just a treble ensemble that it then grew during the pandemic. Actually, we had a lot of parents requesting stuff for other family members. So during the pandemic, we grew to a treble choir, a TB choir, a SATB a cappella choir for high schoolers only, and an adult choir. So we now have 4 reaches of that. And then this past year, we started a 501c3 arm, which is a whole nother conversation for another time, but it allows us, it's called Rise Outreach, and it allows us to provide community programs. So we now have an in-school program at one of the schools in town that doesn't have a music teacher. We have a program at an assisted living home they have like a adult day space care facility. And so we go do music there once a week to help with memory and movement. And then we offer sponsorships to singers who can't afford the fee for RISE. And we offer scholarships. Once you graduate from a RISE program as a senior, you get paid ultimately for each year that you were in the choir as a college scholarship. So it's been really fun developing what that choir business could look like. And that was kind of the reason the book was written. I've just always done things a little differently. If you have a 501c3, you have to have a board. And my Rise Outreach 501c3 has a board, and they do things to empower the community, and that's awesome. But boards sometimes move slowly. And so Rise was founded in 2016 as an LLC. You're buying choir. That's basically that's your product that you're paying for. Yep. Not everyone can afford the product, so that's why the outreach program is there to sponsor singers who would like to revolutionize and inspire singing excellence, but might not be able to afford the whole cost. And so Rise Outreach now offsets some of that so we can reach more of our community. But it's still an LLC with a 501c3 arm. It's really kind of fun, a little different. I'll write a book about it one day.
So, first of all, that's wonderful, amazing work that you're doing. It's not just about the music. There's so much that you are doing through that ensemble to infect the lives of young singers. But since you mentioned another book, let's talk about your first book here.
Yeah,
now,
I wrote it with Alex
I have
Gardner.
to stop and I have to figure out like how you have cloned yourself or how you seem to have 30 hours in your day and I only have 24.
It's just
I don't
different.
understand that
it's just
part.
Different.
Oh,
I don't have kids. I think that's a valid point. I don't have kids. I have a dog.
That is, well, dogs are similar. Having 2 kids, I mean, you can kind of see the gray that's coming in. Yeah, that's my children. That's my children.
Awesome. Well, just keep in mind I don't have kids, so that allows a little bit more flexibility of time.
There you go. There you go.
That should make you feel a little better. Don't worry about it. It's not a competition.
A little better. A little better. So this book that just came out here recently, like you mentioned, that you wrote with your friend and colleague, Alex. So it's called Alex Gardner, The Business of Choir. So talk a little bit about sort of the genesis of this book, where it came from, and then just tell us a little bit about it so people can go and check it out.
Sure. Thanks for asking. It's published through GIA. It's now available on Amazon. But I don't know if you know this, with everything else in the universe, things are hard to get. So paper is not readily available. So it is often sold out, or a long wait period to get it. So just be patient when you do order it. It's a great book. We put it at a price point that would be really manageable. The podcast was actually kind of the spark. I did episode 50. I brought Barbara Tagg on. I mentioned her previously. Mm-hmm. She was my first guest. She was episode number 1. And so for episode 50, to celebrate, I wanted to bring her back and show her that I've become a better podcast host. And she said, I'll do one better. I'm going to interview you. So for episode 50, she was the host, and she flipped the mic on me. It was so much fun. But in that conversation, we mentioned some of our dreams for the next 50 episode. And I've always wanted to be a writer, an author. That's been a dream as young as I can remember. I love writing. I love writing like I speak, which is not good for academic writing, but I do love the power of words. And so after episode 50, Alex called and was like, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I have an idea for a book. And the two of us together have very different experiences. Alex went into a large community organization that was not doing well financially, and he flipped that thing around, and he has grown and won so many awards in the city of Pensacola for what he's done. So he has a lot of experience. His title is Artistic Executive Director. On the flip side, as a choral entrepreneur, I've experienced a lot of these things through reading all these other books. And what Alex and I realize is there are a lot of books out there to teach you how to do marketing, how to do recruitment and retention, how to understand financial documents, how to do assessment and evaluation and advocacy, so how to communicate value and build your team and hire people, all the business things of choir. There's tons of books out there not related to choir, but related to those things. And we both read almost all of them. And so we decided it would be a great idea to put it together in a book specific for choir. And I really wanted it to match the 3 classes I teach. I teach Intro to Music Ed, Elementary Methods, and Secondary Methods. So I wanted 3 sections in this book. Section 1 being, how do you communicate your value? And section 2, how do you build your community, both inside and outside of your classroom or your rehearsal space? And then number 3, how do you tell that story through financial documents, through advocacy, through assessment and evaluation? How are you telling that? So what's your story? How do you share it? What's your value? How do you build capacity and support? How do you get donors and grants and all that stuff? And then how do you tell the story so you can continue to grow? Those are the 3 big pieces of the book. And it's designed to be a reference book. So maybe you want to focus on recruitment and retention this year. So flip to that chapter. Every chapter has an introduction that is totally non-related to music. Everything has some type of analogy, and we use single-ply toilet paper. What is the value of single-ply toilet paper? Spoiler. Different people are going to value it differently. I'm sure your value is you're going to value single-ply toilet paper differently than if you're the gas station who is buying and supplying the single-ply toilet paper for their guests. So what's the value, and how do you communicate that in single-ply toilet paper? Random fact. But we also talk about other things. Like I said, one of the chapters relates recruitment and retention to marathon training and marathon training plans. And you don't have to be a runner to get that, but it's something that I'm passionate about. So it provided a formula for how to grow and retain your singers. And so each chapter has examples, and then at the end there's discussion questions, there's action items, and then there's tons of resources. And you can find out more. We have a website about it, businessofchoir.com. But we're super proud of the book. GIA was a great publisher to work with. They have been just so supportive. And we're really pleased with the cover design, and I love the font. Very small.
It looks fantastic.
Well,
yes.
thank you.
Yes, it looks fantastic.
We love it. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. No, one other question about that, because it occurred to me, choir directors might see that book and be like, oh, well, the business of choir. Well, I'm a public school teacher, so I don't really consider myself running a business. So maybe this is only for like community choir directors, or like you said, someone that has a 501 or LLC. But what you're describing to me sounds very applicable to people that are teaching K through 12 as well.
100%. Every single one of us are business owners. We are running a choir. And if you're running a choir like a business, that's not taking the community aspect out of it. Like, running something like a business is not removing the heart and soul. It is getting the pieces in order so you can impact more singers. You can impact more of your community. When you're looking at it, and we talk about this a lot in the book, because I know that my students will be using it as one of their supplemental textbooks. When we wrote the book, we put in here, you might not have a board, but you have parents that are bringing kids to your school. You might not have a board, but have you considered a booster club? You might not be able to hire a staff, but have you considered having a volunteer coordinator? Why would these things help you? Because here's the thing. If your roots aren't established deeply, confidently, and correctly, how are you expecting to then grow? Before you go out and recruit 50 more singers, do you have the capacity to handle that? How are you going to then retain those 50 singers? Are your roots in place to where the value of what you are bringing to the table as a musician and as an educator and as a choral director, if you bring those 50 students in, will your value and mission stay the same, or will it be watered down? And it's looking at that business aspect of it. There's 10 chapters, 3 sections, and each one is talking, it can relate to where you are. In fact, I'm doing a PLC, I forget what that stands for, learning community.
Yes, professional learning community. Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, I'm learning.
Yeah.
All these acronyms are so different in every region. I'm doing a PLC they hired me for the whole year. I come in and do all 4 of this county's PLCs, and it is so much fun. But the first one is, let's communicate value, because how often, this was like my biggest pet peeve, they would pull a kid from music class. Well, it's just the specials. It's just the specials. Honey, they need that in their life. It is more than just a specials or connection class or whatever they call it. So the most important part is learning the ins and outs of how you communicate, what it is that we do that we all understand, because we speak the language, we speak the lingo. Mm-hmm. How do you communicate that outside of our realm as a way to tell your story, build capacity and support, and continue to grow and impact more people? And it starts by getting really strong roots, and that's a business tactic.
Yeah. Yeah. When I talk to choir directors who are looking to recruit more singers, which is pretty much every choir director, one of my first questions is, well, how are you marketing your program?
Mm-hmm. There's a whole chapter on that.
Yeah. And that's terrific, because often choir directors don't think about it in that way. Like, they really stop. What do you mean marketing your program? It's like you have to think about it in a business sort of way, and in marketing, where what are the things that are going to reach your students, your prospective students. But if you're dealing with the age of singer, where the parents are part of the decision-making process too, you've also got to have things that are reaching those parents as well, and all of those different decision makers. And it's really important. Thinking about it in a marketing sort of way. Yeah,
I love it. Thanks for asking. I get super excited about it, and Alex and I have all sorts of presentations. We've done a few already on the book, and communicating value is the first one we're tossing out into the universe, because it's really important, and it's such an easy loss. But it's, how do you communicate to that principal, to that parent at parent-teacher night? Why should your kid sing in choir?
Yeah.
Those are the important conversations.
Well, and the potential singers that are going to be working with, they have so many more options for what to do with their time than they even did, when we were growing up. And so it's really super important to really communicate that value. And oftentimes we see it in a little bit different way than maybe those. So
that's, all goes back to the, single ply toilet paper example in the book. It's so much more well written and edited in the book, but it's but we enjoyed using it. And it, like I said, you can just toss to one chapter and jump to the summary and the action items and make an impact on your choir. And I can't wait. Like, part of the page, businessofchoir.com, is the community that's there. And we have a whole group so we can see how people are changing as they implement some of these techniques and tactics.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people need to read it, if for anything else, just to see what the real value of single ply toilet paper is. Like, that's
I love it.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, hey, let's talk a little bit about rehearsal strategies.
Yeah, I love that that's a big theme throughout all of your episodes.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I've noticed as I've been doing this and talking with different choir directors. One of the constant themes that I see is that people are always looking for rehearsal strategies, whether it's making what they do more interesting and more proficient, or they just want to, they're stuck in a rut and they want to learn about new techniques and strategies. So I'm interested to hear maybe one or two strategies from you that you like to use that, singers like, that are fun, but also that you keep coming back to them because they are so useful in your rehearsals.
Well, thank you for asking, and thanks for giving me a heads up, because it took a very long time to pick one. In fact, I meet with my singer leaders in my community choir. I meet with them one-on-one before the semester starts, and they pick out their tasks for the day. They create goal-driven choir contracts, which is really fun. Anyway, I met with one of them yesterday, and I asked, what is your favorite rehearsal technique that I do? Which was a very interesting and enlightening conversation. And so I call it the red thread. Back in the day when you would need a Band-Aid, you would pull the red thread of the Band-Aid to open it and get the Band-Aid out. And that red thread weaves through the whole Band-Aid package. And so I call this rehearsal technique the red thread, because you start knowing you need the Band-Aid. So you start knowing what section you want those students or those singers to master. And then you work backwards so the red thread weaves throughout it. So you take that passage and you turn it into some type of warm-up, some type of rhythmic game, some type of activity. For example, I was doing a piece at a workshop a couple weeks ago. I was at a summer camp for choir, basically. And there was this piece that they were singing so heavy. So I started rehearsal with that fun little bim bum biddy biddy bum biddy bum biddy biddy bum bim bum. Everybody knows that. If not, there's a little clap snap, pat your leg thing that goes with it. And so that gets them, they walk in the room, and before they're even sitting down, I'm doing bim bum, and they just know to come into that. And from there, I lighten it up. They keep them singing in that light thing. As soon as everyone's in their seats, I like to use popular music as my warm-up breath engager. So immediately I popped on Suzanne Vega's da 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 da. And as that's playing, we're doing our body stretches, we're doing our breathing exercises, and then I bring them into da da da, keeping them on that nice light tone. Immediately, as soon as that, I fade that out, and there's immediately a warm-up on the screen that's a passage from their song, and instead of the words, I've written bim bom in underneath it. So we're going bim bum biddy biddy bum bim bum, whatever it is, and then it goes up a half step and up a half step, and immediately we transfer that into the music. Sing on bim bom, sing on da 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 da. Keep that lightness, sing on words. So you see how that whole thing transitions like a red thread to the goal of the day, but every piece is connected. So that's my rehearsal strategy technique. It seems like that might take a lot of time, but while you're walking your dog, while you're washing your hair, while you are blow drying your hair, while you are driving, while you're walking down the grocery aisle, while you're in line at the grocery store, there are tons of times where you can just be thinking, what is causing that to not sound the way I want it in my head? How can I fix that? Work backwards. How can I engage them? How can I get their breath there? How can I get their vocal technique there? How can I tie it into the piece of music? And those are the steps. So that's kind of my rehearsal strategy. And I have that for lots of different things. And you never know when a new song on the radio or a new song, a kid will be like, Dr. Birch, have you heard this song? It's a great warm-up song. And then I'll go proceed to listen to it a couple times until I can figure out how I can use it. Sometimes you can't use it, but sometimes you can. For example, you know that Hypnotize song by Biggie?
Yes.
No words. Do the instrumental version. Great movement warm-up.
Love it.
Random facts.
Love it. And, it kind of ties back into what we talked about at the beginning, which is planning.
Yeah.
Like, yes, that does take some planning, but the more that you do that, like, I've always found transitions are one of the most difficult things.
Those have to be planned.
yeah, if you've got it planned out, and the more you work on it that way, then yeah, it just becomes easier the more you do it. It's just like anything else.
Practice on practice. It's a Bob Duke quote. Consistent, repetitive, accurate repetitions.
Love it. Well, Emily, as we wrap up here, it's just been wonderful to connect with you.
Yeah,
I'm
you
so
too,
glad.
Matt.
Yeah, so glad that we were able to make this work in our schedules. Before I let you go, please share with my audience where they can find you, where they can find the book, where they can find the podcast, any of the other 12 things that you're doing currently.
Well, thank you for the space. Listeners, it is great to meet you. Matt is doing a great job. So it is awesome to get to know you in this virtual way. You can find my website, emilybirch.org, because I do so much stuff. It's an organization. Get it? You can reach me at emilybirch.org/contact. You can find out more about the book at businessofchoir.com. There's a link for where you can purchase it. There's all sorts of resources on that page as well, businessofchoir.com, or you can find the book on Amazon or on GIA's music education page. Please feel free to look me up on Instagram at Dr. MEB, or my podcast, Music Ed Matters Podcast. We're on Instagram, or you can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts or watch your YouTubes. I will be editing this episode so my listeners get to meet Mr. Matt Walker and the Choir Conductor Corner podcast. Did I get all of the acronyms? Did I get that right?
Got it. You got it. Yeah.
I'm so glad. But you can find that at emilybirch.org/podcast if you're looking for links. But I'm just so excited to have met a fellow music podcaster, and I'm just so impressed with the work that you are doing, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you. I am just honored that you are able and willing to come on the podcast, and I'm excited for our audience to get to know you more and all of this amazing work that you are doing. And hopefully sometime in the future we can circle back, because, you do enough stuff. I'm sure we have more material for another conversation.
Sure. Make sure they don't get sick of me first. But yeah, give me a holler back and I'll come right back.
Thanks so much, Emily.
All right, my friends, you are doing awesome things. I just know you are. You're the only you there is in the whole world. In case you have forgotten, we are so lucky that you are on this earth, and your students and your singers are even more lucky. So, in case you've forgotten, you really matter. We all know that music matters, especially what we get to do in our careers as music educators. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.